We're awaiting the White House press briefing as we are a few moments away from that. We're also awaiting the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court decision on President Trump's travel ban. Homeland Security Chief John Kelly speaking out in very clear terms about just why the part of the world targeted by Mr. Trump's executive order is such a national security concern.
The good news about them declaring the caliphate is we know where they are and we can go and destroy them or at least deal with them. As they go to the winds because Mosul falls or issues in Syria change, they're available, individually and in packs to go to other parts of the world to do their dirty deeds. So there are thousands we know of fighters that when they make the decision, will move out of places like Iraq, that part of Iraq that's controlled by the caliphate, and then parts of Syria, and they'll be available to create, their brand of mayhem in Europe and potentially the United States. Papers are not hard to get in that part of the world, particularly since in many cases they overran, ISIS and the affiliates overran, government offices that make papers. So it's not a small threat.
Let's bring in Michael Wild, immigration attorney, former federal prosecutor, and also, interestingly enough, Mrs. Trump's immigration attorney, and Hans von Spakovsky. He's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and appreciate both of you. I want to weave in a little more news to all of this. As Secretary Kelly made that statement publicly, he also said that he presented more information in a classified setting as to the timing of this executive order. And Michael, now I'm looking down and seeing this from the Associated Press, that our top U.S. commander in Iraq says he expects to retake Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria from ISIS over the next 6 months, but the next several weeks are going to be particularly crucial. What about the timing in all of this? How does that impact whether or not this was legal to do or is legal to do?
The president acted quickly and decisively, and we should in no way be hamstringing him from protecting our shores. But that said, carve out permanent residents, carve out dual nationals, don't have a vagary that, shines the Constitution into a closet. It's so important that we do things right, no matter what our motive is. This president is a patriot and genuinely inclined and is trying to make America safe. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we put out judicious orders and that Congress, who has the plenary power to officiate in immigration, make sure that the president doesn't discriminate. He, by the 1965 Act, is not allowed to discriminate based on national origin. There's no Indonesia on this. There's no Saudi Arabia. It looks selective.
Well, let me ask you a little bit more about that, and let me get Hans in on this as well. What was significant about Secretary Kelly making those comments, for example, about Syria, is that Syria really has no functioning government that we're speaking to at this time. So it would be great to be able to reach out to the nation of which the origin of the people on this ban belong. But if you can't reach out to the functioning government of that nation, then what are you to do? Hans?
Oh, I'm sorry. In fact, the reason these countries are on the list and other Muslim countries are not on the list is because these 7 countries are failing or failed countries. Indonesia has a functioning government. That makes vetting possible and much easier. This is just a temporary suspension to make sure that we have the kind of extreme vetting that is needed for 7 countries that even the Obama administration put on their watch list because they are the largest sources of terrorists in the world.
So, Michael, go back to your point, because you're saying that the president should have certain powers, but you have some issues with some of the specifics of this order that you feel if he did not include, then we wouldn't be here having this conversation.
Article 3 is very vague. Listen, I'm also a patriot. I'm a former federal prosecutor and mayor, and I'm an immigration law professor. We don't want policy being taken place in the courts. We also want to make sure, again, that we get this right. The president does not have the exclusive authority to exclude all persons. There are green card holders that have been vetted properly. And yes, we don't want to have people come forward if there is no law enforcement or intelligence basis that can be done. And there are administrative ways of reckoning with this. And if this was a temporary suspension, if it was genuinely inclined, it wouldn't be meeting itself out in this fashion. And certainly the way it was rolled out begs a lot of questions. And I believe that there are ways, if the government wants to limit this, again, students have less of a right than green card holders, who have less of a right than citizens. I know when I travel internationally, I don't have the right to go into an American embassy because the equal protection doesn't work until it hits our shores. But we do have to make sure that we act as the moral compass of the world and the cop that plays by the rules.
I see what you're saying, Michael. So, Hans, what is your response to that? That there's just too much in this bucket. If the ban is a bucket, there's too much in it for it to be legal. That's Michael's argument.
That is simply not the case. Congress has 100% authority over immigration, and it delegated to the president in a very simple statutory provision. It gave the president the ability to suspend the entry of any aliens if he believes it's detrimental to the interests of the United States. That gives him almost unlimited authority in this area. And it's very clear because the U.S. Supreme Court has said the zenith of the government's power is at the border when it comes to choosing who can come in and out. There is no legal issue here. The president acted lawfully within that federal statute and within the Constitution.
Michael, I'm going to give you a second to respond to that. I want to play a little bit of this sound, though, because you were mentioning that there is a way to also involve Congress. Well, with Secretary Kelly, the new head of the Department of Homeland Security, talking to lawmakers yesterday, there was a bit of a sound when he was asked about evidence about terrorists that have maybe slipped into the United States as refugees. He was asked pointedly about that, and I want to play this exchange.
Sure.
But you don't have any proof at this point?
Not until the boom.
Not until what?
Not until they act and blow something up or go into a mall and kill people. So we won't know until then.
Michael, it's quite an exchange. What do you think about that?
Again, we shouldn't be playing to America's fears. We fought pirates on the high seas. I've said this a few times already. The Alien and Sedition Acts were available for our president in those days to exclude dangerous aliens, and the president can, if he wants, under Section 212F of the Immigration Act, as the gentleman said, exclude people, but he has to do it uniformly. You can't violate the Establishment Clause by creating exceptions, even if it's well-intended for Jews and Christians and minority religions. Again, we have to get this out of the court. We have to give the president and his good offices the opportunity to create better vetting. We're all agreed on that, but the rules of engagement must be in concert with our Constitution and not flaunting it.
Hans, the timing of it, though, we're back circling to that. There is, as Michael points out, an argument that some of this should be taking place in Congress, that we should adjust our policies that way through the representatives of the people. But then timing becomes an issue as well. And I'm circling back to the point at the beginning of the segment about whether or not there was pressure to put this ban in place, like the indefinite ban of Syrian refugees in place, because of what is happening overseas, what it looks like over the next 6 months. So how does that intersect? Because there's a broader debate happening about philosophy and legality, and that is 100% appropriate. But then we have some real world pressure that it looks like we're also dealing with, and I'm wondering how you balance the two.
Yeah, but Congress already acted on this. In 2015, they passed a Border Enhancement Act that, in fact, the Obama administration used to put almost all of the countries that are in the current executive order on a watch list because they were countries of concern. So Congress already acted. They gave the power to the president to do this. And I don't think it in any way violates any Establishment Clause or anything else, because the president in this order has said, we are going to prioritize allowing people in who are being persecuted because of their religion. We have always done that, and that is not discriminatory in any manner.
Then why not, I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but then why not specifically ask the president to issue a new order carving out protection for permanent residents, for people who are titans of industry, who are responsible for American employment, for people with very strong family ties, students who are working on optional practical training for Amazon and Microsoft in Washington State?
The White House has already said this does not apply to permanent residents. And frankly, many of the big employers like Microsoft and Google and others have been abusing the law to bring in people from outside, not because there's a dearth of Americans who can fill those positions, but so they can pay them lower wages.
No,
and that is a proven fact. There's been testimony in front of Congress for that.
Okay.
himself and the progenitors of the greatest technology say that the greatest patents come not only from Americans but future Americans.
Okay, well,
which
let me just stop it there,
foreigners.
because this is really focused. A lot of this, the ban, came out of the conversation about keeping us safe because of the threat of terror. And Michael, your point's well taken. We don't want to operate simply from the basis of fear. The White House, though, it looks like it is addressing this question about whether or not individuals have come into our country from the 7 countries named that meant to do us harm. And they just supplied John Roberts with an exclusive list that they supplied as well to the judge regarding whether or not this was the case. And they listed off people that came into the country from these 7 countries that are banned that were arrested or part of terrorist plots. So with information like that, going back to the legality, what do you think a judge is going to do with that list, Michael, when he or she sees that? And how does that get weighed into the decision about whether or not this ban continues?
Very, very good question. I don't know that they've had an opportunity yet to have an airing of that list or put forward testimony and statements to have this vetted properly in our legal system. But yes, we're not going to wait for a boom. Nobody should be exploiting fear. And we have to be able, as the greatest experiment in democracy with these extraordinary golden doors, make right by the legacy of our founding fathers. Get rid of ISIS, as we did the pirates, but make sure at the very time that we set a moral compass as the cop on the street, that when they execute justice, we do it judiciously and with heart. Why are we stopping refugees? Why are we running scared?
So here, let me just read a little bit, because I'm just seeing this for the first time, and I think both of you will find this interesting. I'll stop when we see Sean Spicer, but here's a list that I'm seeing. Here's an example that was listed off for the court. On June 3rd, 2016, a Somali national admitted to the U.S. as a refugee when he was a child, and who subsequently became a naturalized U.S. citizen, was sentenced to 35 years in prison after being convicted of conspiring to commit murder in Syria on behalf of ISIS. That's one example. Another example, on February 5th, 2015, a citizen of Somalia who came to the United States as a refugee in 2007 was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiring to provide material support to foreign terrorist organization Al-Shabaab. And the list goes on. These are the examples, Hans, that the White House says strengthen their case. Does it?
Oh, it does. But the whole mistake here is that no lone federal judge sitting in a district court in Washington has the right to substitute his judgment for the president's on what might be detrimental to the national security of the United States. Again, the statute in question gives the president almost unlimited authority, and the U.S. Supreme Court has said that when it comes to national security and foreign policy issues, the president has great authority, and no federal judge should be substituting his judgment for that of the president on this issue.
So, gentlemen, are we headed to the Supreme Court? Michael, is that the next step based on the strength of both of your arguments?
There is no way that this isn't heading to the Supreme Court unless the President of the United States clarifies this and does it more judiciously.
And let me pause. Let me ask you there. What happens if he did? What happens if Sean Spicer does step to the podium and say, we've made some changes? Then do things change?
Remarkably, it changes. And the President has the intelligence apparatus and law enforcement and the military. And yes, the judge should not be infringing or replacing his opinion because it's a judicial opinion. But let's not forget that we have checks and balances here. The president owes deference to the courts as the courts owe deference to the president. Historically, Supreme Court decisions, mind you, have turned to immigration as political questions. They've looked at immigration and they've deferred to the plenary power of Congress and the shared authority with the president. But come out with an executive order that speaks well of America's majesty and those glorious Lady Liberty that's but a few miles from here. Because right now, we shouldn't be turning our backs. We should be using immigration to complement the areas of our economy that are fledgling or need support. And yes, we should be making sure we roll up and put ISIS down. No doubt that's our job.
I think I speak for our viewers that we really appreciate both of your thoughts in the conversation. It will continue. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Hans. And here's Sean Spicer.
Example of the